Welcome to this tour of Clerkenwell. Today we're going to take you around the area which has got a really exciting and diverse history. It's a place of great contrast. It's been the playground for the rich and famous, but it's also been a place of extreme poverty throughout the ages. It's a place where there's been a lot of revolution and radical thinking come from the area, and it has had a big effect on our modern world today. So behind me is St James Clerkenwell. There's been a church on this site since the 11th century. This particular building was built in 1792 by John Carr, a local man who was influenced by famous architects such as Christopher Wren. The church has still got its original organ built into the church in 1792, and it is still played today, particularly at carol services, if you have opportunity to join us for one of them. The name for this area comes from this well, known as the Clerks Well. This was where people would gather to see clerics or priests put on shows. Usually these would be taken from Bible stories. The building behind me is the Marx Memorial Library. It started life in 1737 as a Welsh workers' school and morphed into a working men's coffee house where the big ideas of the time were discussed. Most notably, Vladimir Lenin and Karl Marx were known to have spoken here at the coffee house. And while Lenin was exiled in London, he was known to have worked here as it became a print shop, printing revolutionary communist literature that would be distributed throughout Russia. This monument is to the 66 martyrs of Smithfield. These were Protestants who refused to give up their faith when persecuted by the state. This plaque is for Anne Askew, a member of the royal court, King Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine. She was a friend of Catherine in the court with her. And when Anne was found to be distributing parts of the Bible in the English language, she was arrested as a heretic. At the time, Henry VIII was trying to get rid of his first wife, Catherine, because she hadn't produced any male heirs for him. So Anne was tortured quite terribly for a very long time to try implicate other members of the court as being heretics with her. She refused to give up anyone else in the court, and she'd been tortured so badly that when they came to execute her, she could no longer walk to the execution post but was carried in a chair. So they strapped her in a chair to the post where she was burned alive at Smithfield Market. Behind me you can see the HUGH School. This was founded in 1890 and was named after Hugh Middleton, who built the new river that flows into the area and brought fresh water, making it a popular location for spas and leisure facilities. But beneath this school there is a darker history. Beneath the playground is still the cells of the Bridewell prison. The Bridewell prison has been here since 1615, when it was known as the House of Detention. It became a debtor's prison, and anyone who owed money would be locked up here until their relatives could pay for them to be released. In 1867, an Irish arms dealer known as Robert Buke was imprisoned here. He'd been part of an Irish Liberation Society and was awaiting trial. The other members of the society decided to try and liberate him from this prison by employing the use of gunpowder. So on the 13th of December, they snuck out in the night, loaded the walls of the prison with gunpowder, and there was an explosion. The explosion was a little larger than anticipated. It killed 12 people injured 120 people, and an entire row of houses on Corporation Row was demolished by the blast. In the year 1080, the Order of St. John was founded. They started by building a hospital in Jerusalem to serve the sick and the injured. Their fame grew around Europe, and by 1140 they were given 10 acres of land here in Clerkenwell to start a priory. The priory also functioned as a hospital, treating the sick, and also acting as a retreat for those who had been unwell. It became so popular that even King John came and stayed here in 1212 to recuperate after an illness. During the reign of Henry VIII, the priory was dissolved as part of the dissolution of the monasteries. However, as the area developed and as the population grew, and particularly once the railways were being built and opened, there became a great need for healthcare in the area. There were many injuries happening from the construction and the use of the railways. In 1877, the Order of St. John was restarted as an ambulance association, treating the sick and getting them to safety. Queen Victoria was so impressed with the Order of St. John that she bestowed on them a Royal Order of Chivalry in 1888. This allowed their symbols to now include the unicorn and the lion that you can see behind me, for royal animals by royal decree. Since then, the Order of St. John has provided invaluable services in first aid during the First and Second World Wars, throughout the city when it was being bombed, and also in the field of battle. The gate behind me was built in 1504 as the main entrance to the Priory of the Order of St. John. Unfortunately, the rest of the Priory didn't survive for too long after that. The Gatehouse now houses a Museum of St. John, which is available to visit most days of the week and has a lot of fascinating artefacts inside, so I recommend a visit if you're in town. Behind me is a very narrow street called Passing Alley. When the Victorians were writing down street names, they couldn't quite bring themselves to write what it was actually known as, so they changed the original I to an A, which means that this was essentially a public toilet. Let's see if it's still in use today. Oh, Isaac! What are you doing?
Well, I'm here in Passing Alley.
You can't do that in public anymore, you'll get arrested. So here we are in Smithfield's market. There has been a meat market on this site for at least 1,000 years. Smithfield comes from the Roman Smithfield because this was just a big empty field outside the city walls of London. The market has been here for over 1,000 years, and it was a site of many grisly executions, including William Wallace, the very famous Scottish leader who you might remember from the film Braveheart in the 90s. The Smithfield martyrs were also executed here, and the executions took place here because it was a public place where everyone could see how they had been displeasing the state. As you can imagine, the meat market has not always been particularly clean and sanitised as it is now. Historically, they used to bring cattle all the way down from Hertford down St John's Street, which is just behind you, and along the way there are many water troughs for the cattle. Many of them are built by the Metropolitan Drinking Fountain Association to make sure that the cattle were well watered and arrived in a decent state for slaughter here at the market. In 1864, the Victorians wanted to make it a bit cleaner and a bit nicer for the new city that they were building. So they built underneath here some underground railway tracks as an extension to the tube network to bring the cattle in underground so that they wouldn't have to march them through the streets of London. You might recognise the architecture. It's by the same architect who built Tower Bridge, that very famous bridge in London. His name was Horace Jones, and you can see from how nicely decorated and how colourful the structure is that he had a particular style. As the city grew during the Victorian era, more and more people started trying to commute into London. Population density was so great that slums were emerging and it was really hard for people who were living in the city. But this was where all the work was, so everybody wanted to come. By 1825, there were 750,000 people working in the city. So the Victorians set about building the first underground railway network in the world. John Fowler's original concept of the tube was to use compressed air to shoot the trains from one station to the next. However, the tunnels kept leaking and this wasn't very practical. But the concept was truly ahead of its time, as that's how Tesla's proposed system from New York to LA was going to work as well. For the tube to open on time, they ended up using a steam train. However, it wasn't designed very well for it and the smoke filled the tunnels. First station on the underground network, Farringdon station behind me, opened on the 9th of January 1863. On its first day of use, 40,000 people boarded trains here. But it took until the turn of the century for the trains to be electrified, which is what they are now. When they initially started using electric power on the railways, they would give it a shunt of electricity at the station and see if it would run until it ran out of power. Occasionally, the power would not be enough to get it to the next station, so the passengers would have to get out and push it along the tracks to the next station.